Julia, in 1966, John did an interview with a lady called Maureen Cleave from the Evening Standard, in which he said that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. In England, people just thought it's Lennon again, and it washed over them quite quickly. In America, when this fan magazine got hold of it, it created utter chaos. What are your reflections upon that?
Well, I felt desperately sorry for John, we all did. I think it was quite a long time later, months and months later, was it even a year later, after it had been reported over here and, as you said, sort of just gone by the by. But in America, in the Bible Belt country, which is probably the majority of the place, certainly at that time, it was, it was like a war really against John personally, against the Beatles, of course, because he wasn't a single artist at that time. But the television footage of books being burnt and everything, it contributed definitely to the breakup of the Beatles. I know everyone likes to think it's Yoko. It just isn't. There was so much going on during that year that the final it seemed that the final straw that broke the camel's back was at Candlestick Park in August 1966. But during this tour, John had to apologise, hadn't he? And people were still very, very resentful and angry towards them. And I did read that their car, and they wouldn't be in a small car, but their car was rocked from side to side. This is before Candlestick Park, so it isn't surprising in that case what happened, is it?
It's fairly well documented that in certainly the last 2 to 3 years of touring, they could barely hear themselves. The girls were screaming so loudly. And then, of course, we have the Jesus Christ thing, people constantly asking them about Vietnam, like they could do something about it. What happened in Manila, where they're supposed to have snubbed an Holocaust. Do you think the time had come that they had to stop touring just for their own sake?
Well, I don't see how they could have gone on. And I've heard, you'll know better than me, that in that one in Candlestick Park, was that after Los Angeles? I think that was the very last one. I think that they didn't sing at all, that they just opened their mouths like sort of gaping fish on the stage. I don't know if that's true, but I have heard it. And that they said they were talking amongst themselves on the stage and said, right, this is it, there'll be no more after this.
At the time, there were various interviews with members. I know that George made the comment, I don't feel like I'm a Beatle any longer, until touring stopped. I don't know if you what contact you were with John at the time, but do you know whether or not, how did they all feel about the fact that they weren't touring anymore?
The split up, as you said, it was really sort of untenable in everybody's eyes that they couldn't carry on like this. And you can see it in the newly released 8 Days a Week as well. You can see it rising there. I don't know where this screaming first started. They say it was San Francisco. Frank Sinatra, sorry. They say it was Frank Sinatra. And then, of course, Elvis got the screaming. And by the time the Beatles came along, screaming was sort of endemic if you liked something. Now, if you go to a Paul concert now, there'll be, 15,000 people there. Everybody is either singing along or dancing along or admiring along to what Paul is doing on the stage. I don't think he would stay on the stage for 2 minutes if no one could hear him for screaming. It just doesn't happen now. So it seemed to be a time warp where screaming was the best thing that you could do. Mass hysteria, wasn't it? Complete mass hysteria. So their breaking up was partly due to that. Partly due, I think, to the Jesus comment, which was so unfortunate in that society. And that they wanted to go on with their own lives. Now, you're talking about touring. What did Paul do? he goes back to small things, doesn't he? He goes back to Wings. They're famously with Linda travelling round in the back of a van with their dogs and whatever children they had at the time. Paul wanted to be back on stage. He's a star performer, isn't he? He's the world's most iconic superstar at this moment, I believe. I think he still thinks when he's up there in front of thousands and thousands, I think he thinks he's in the cavern. He performs as if he's in the cavern. He gives it all. He's a natural showman, isn't he? I don't think John was. John was a poet, a philosopher poet to me. I see three. I see Leonard Cohen, if you want pessimism, but wasn't he just wonderful? Grouchy old Bob Dylan, who finally has got the Nobel Prize, thank goodness. And of course he's not going. You wouldn't expect him to. The speech will be interesting. And then John. I see them as three 20th century poets for the modern times moving on. So I don't know what John would have done. I think Paul would have always gone back on stage. I don't know what George did, actually, in that. I mean, I know he was a Buddhist and had that going on in his life and wanted to perfect the sitar, which he did. But I don't know if he would have thought of going back on stage. And Ringo is on stage. So they were four individuals, and people forget this. It's the Beatles, like they were four children joined at the hip, born together, and they weren't.
After the touring ended, they did actually go their separate ways for a couple of months.
Yes.
George to India to perfect the sitar.
Yeah.
Paul worked with George Martin on the score for Family Way with Yul Bennett film. And John, of course, went to Spain.
To Almeria,
to do
yes.
How Long the War.
And started writing Strawberry Field in Spain. Yeah.
There's actually a funny story from Michael Crawford and Roy Kinnear, where they said John would go on the sand dunes every night with an acoustic guitar and start strumming this tune. And Mike Crawford apparently turned around to Roy Kinnear and went, "I don't know that one. I thought I knew all their songs. I don't know that one." And Roy would go, "No, I don't know that one either." And 2 months later, it was, of course, released and on Strawberry.
Well, I think it was fairly well psychedelic back in the studio.
When the Beatles reappeared with Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, their image had changed completely. Those lovable Hard Day's Night mop tops were now gone. And now we had moustaches, beards, in John's case glasses, and these incredible clothes, look almost like Victorian military clothes.
Yeah.
How do you think at the time that strange sounding new single and that new image was perceived by people?
Well, it was the hippie generation, wasn't it? It was the era of San Francisco, of Haight-Ashbury, and everything was going on. So I think to the real fan it was no surprise. To the parents it was it was more of lock up your daughters, right? Like back to Elvis days, wasn't it? You know, keep them safe. But they were out there leading what was already going on. The revolution into the teenager as a fully fledged human being, which of course we know is not true. If you've had teenagers, it's only them that think they're fully fledged human beings. But it was another era, and you know, John with the glasses, we're both very short-sighted, and he got contact lenses at the same time as me. He got them for them, and he got them for me at the Liverpool Contact Lens Clinic here in Bold Street. And when he was getting them, I said, me too. And I got them when I was 18. In those days, they were a bit strict about when you could have them. Now, I got used to mine straight away, and John couldn't because of what we're sitting in now, these bright lights. And if you've ever been on a stage, you know you can't see beyond the first row because the lights are just excruciatingly bright. And John, when he looked down, when he was doing that bobbing up and down, well, that was him. But if you look, he was looking down, a bit sort of supercilious, but it wasn't. It was the contact lenses. And they were the old hard plastic diamond-coated contact lenses that we had then. So I was able to get used to mine, and John never, ever got used to his. So it must have been an absolute relief when he could just wear his glasses again.
Hunter Davies told us that, he said, obviously John had the granny glasses, and he said we all knew that John was really short-sighted. Yeah. He said, and John would say, very fashionable, aren't they, Hunter? And a damn blessing in disguise, because I have been waiting for.
That's right.
For them forever, you know. Once the band came off the road and went into the studio for this awful long amount of time after Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, I mean, if you think the first album was recorded in 12 hours, Pepper took 3.5 months to record.
And weren't Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane meant to be on the album, and then they were pulled to be a double A side because it was felt that they had to get a record out.
The story we heard, and maybe this is, they'd gone into Abbey Road, according to George Martin's Summer Love Book, to do a thematic album about Liverpool. Those 2 songs were recorded, and that's when Brian came and said, look, we've had nothing out for 6 months.
Exactly, yeah, we've got to get something going, yeah.
So George said, well, I've only got 2 songs. There's nothing else I can give you. And I think that once the 2 songs had been released, because of course those days they were quite big about doing singles that weren't on albums.
Yes.
And by all accounts, Brian and George Martin sat down and said to the 2 main guys, to John and Paul, this is going to be difficult to do a Liverpool thematic album now, because your 2 best songs have just gone already. So they go back in to start this psychedelic thing that takes months on end to do. Do you think at that point Brian's role in the camp had lessened a wee bit because there wasn't as much for the Beatles to be doing on a daily basis?
Well, it was all part of the progress of the whole group, wasn't it? I say group deliberately because a band in those days had violins and cellos and timpani and stuff like that. I think it was part of their progress, wasn't it? And how much was Brian going to be able to carry on being such an important... Without him, John has said, without Brian, we wouldn't have made anything. He said, without 2 people, without Elvis, before Elvis there was nothing, and without Brian, we would never have got as far as this. So Brian's role, like their roles, was just changing. But I think he would have always been the real 5th Beatle, if you like. He did take them from the cavern to the world stage.
Yeah, completely. When Sgt. Pepper came out, it was, there's lots of things that we take for granted now when we buy an album by a rock artist, that we get the lyrics in the booklet and we get the gatefold and free gifts and the posters and the badges. This was the first time it ever happened.
Yeah.
When it was released in June '67, just how, for a start, it was very different than anything they'd done before. That it was all this packaging. Just how massive did it seem at the time, or did it not seem massive at the time?
Well, it did. It was a colossal thing. It was never my own favourite album. I am back to Revolver. I think that change seemed to burst on the scene, but there's been lots of rumblings of a different type of music coming from way back, coming from Revolver, I think, and the White Album. We got them all as demo discs sent to the house, so they were all flat on one side, they're not to be sold and not to be used and not to be listened to and all the rest of it. So, yes, it was really exciting, but I think it was the final burst for me of the innovative type of music. It had started a fair bit before. So when they were released, if you like, from the Beatles and the music that had to be done, then this is a step that they were going in, like it went wild, didn't it? And it didn't stay like that, did it? It didn't stay like that. It's sort of a standalone music piece, isn't it?
You were saying about getting sent the white labels and various things.
Yeah.
Among your closer friends, and presumably this is a fairly personal question, is certainly your closer girlfriends. Were there any sort of advantages or disadvantages to being John Lennon's sister when everybody wanted to join the fan club or be as close to them as humanly possible and all that kind of thing?
Well, everyone who had a brother, which is most people, because it's basically a Catholic city, we have large families. In the road that we lived in, down in Springwood, every family had 6, 7, 8 children. We were 3. We were quite sort of small. And everyone who had an older brother, it wouldn't be, does your brother play in a group, or what does your brother call his group? It would be, what does he play and does he sing? It was an assumption that he was in a group, because he was. And in my book, I've put that I had an image just of if we'd have had the modern drones and gone over the UK and America, you'd have found garden sheds like doing this, where they were all practicing. If you'd have had a laser light, it would have been the whole country would have been shimmering. And a few of them made it, and most of them didn't. Because at 15, when you left school at 15 in Britain, I'm not sure where America was then, because they were doing the same thing. At 15, that's when the apprenticeship started, and people had been instructed by their parents. They're guided by their parents and their schools and careers. Are you going to be a plumber, an electrician? What are you going to do? An engineer, wherever you were going in a trade. Or are you going to stay at school? Even are you going to work in a shop, a record shop, NEMS? What are you going to do? There was no such thing as wholesale children, because they are children, leaving school, not without a job, without a career path, without a focus in hand. It was very rare. For example, Colin Hanton, who was the Beatles, the Quarrymen's drummer, who played a tea-chest bass with a kitchen brush and a rope. That was the drum. In our kitchen, every 3-4 times a week he was playing in our kitchen. They were rehearsing there. His parents pulled him out to do a carpentry course. He's a carpenter, a first-class carpenter. He didn't have a choice whether he wanted to stay on in the group or not. His parents had decided do you want to do this or this or this? And so he is a carpenter, ended up with his own business. They all ended up doing something. Rod Davis, who was the banjo player, highly, highly intelligent fellow, ended up teaching languages, like me. And that's because his parents wanted him away from that Lennon, went to Mr. Pobjoy, who was the Quarry Bank head. They arranged for him to do S-level, which he did, and for him to be head boy, which was a real accolade, and anything to get him out of the Quarrymen. And at one point, John came back. John loved Rod very much. They were great, great friends. He met him in the street. They were looking for a drummer, and he said, "Can you drum?" He'd have had him. "Can you drum, Rod?" And Rod went to Cambridge. So everyone was doing... We were far more instructed by our parents and school and careers about what to do. Not many people could rebel as much as the Beatles did. Paul was going to be an English teacher. Yeah, he was going to college he was going to do English A-level. It's just that they made that breakthrough by going to Hamburg first. So everyone... In our road, all these brothers that were in groups started to do apprenticeships, went to do their A-levels at grammar school, went to do different things. So in my school, I was at a girls' grammar school, opposite Paul's house actually, New Hayes, and we had a notice board, and all the other boys disappeared. And so we kept a notice board of what they were doing and where they were going and everything. And occasionally it was even announced in assembly, which was excruciatingly embarrassing. So we weren't unusual, believe me.
I'm sure. Yeah. In the summer of '67, this little Indian character emerged in the Beatles' lives called Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And the British press, I think, to some degree, thought they'd gone completely bonkers, but they followed him off to various places.
Well, it turned out they were right.
What do you think they were looking for?
What are we all looking for? I mean, they'd been plunged into this chaotic world. Brian had died. And it was sort of, I think there's times in all our lives when we turn to some sort of religious, as in way of life, philosophy, looking for answers, and that's what they were doing.
When we think about a global broadcast in the 21st century, our first thought is more than likely Live Aid, but the very first global broadcast...
With Bob Geldof, yeah.
The very first global broadcast was Our World, and the Beatles were asked to represent Great Britain with a song written by John called All You Need Is Love, which was a world transmission in one day from a live broadcast.
Yeah, because it's 50 years next year for that as well, isn't it?
At Abbey Road. How were you proud of John, the fact that he was the one who could put this message across on that day to a live...
I'm always proud of John, no matter what he did, the good, the bad and the ugly. I am so proud of John, and very privileged to be with Jackie, my younger sister, to be the sisters of John. Of John. You all call him Lennon. I call him John. We are just so fortunate that we had the same mother, and it was our mother that was the prime inspiration for all this. It was she that was the artist and the singer and the dancer and the wacky, intelligent, funky person that gave birth to John. Definitely.
I was going to ask you about your mother and about Mimi, just one question each. So the first one is about your mother. She taught him to play, didn't it, on a banjo?
On a banjo, yes, because my mother played the banjo, the ukulele, the piano, anything. And she was teaching John when he was very young to play the banjo. And the other thing that she played was the piano accordion. When she was playing the banjo with John, and she played it to us all the time, if we had a story, if we had the bears in the woods, it'd be boom, boom, on the piano. We'd all be sitting on the piano stool while she played it, because she played the stories as well. And John read us the stories, and my mother would be like this on the piano with it. It was like a theatre. We lived in a theatre. And it was just like normal to us. And the other children from the road would come in as well. If John was there and instruments, we'd go over and get Anne and Claire, come in. We can have a bit of I suppose you call it a jam session, if you like. It was only a story. But my mother was teaching John to play the banjo. She would put her hands on the frets, and John would be doing the strumming, not picking, it was strumming. And then she'd do strumming and picking while John was learning the chords. Meanwhile, Paul, 5 minutes away on the next estate where I went to school, he was playing the guitar upside down because he was left-handed. Now, I called John and Paul the Dream Team. And when they got together, it was the Dream Team consisted of a banjo player and an upside-down guitar. Because Paul didn't know at that time you could have a guitar for a left-handed player. And John sort of made this transition to the guitar. But Rod Davies used to bring his banjo. My mother would have it off him straight away. She had her own banjo, but it was mother of pearl backed, and it was brought back from sea with a monkey by her father. So it lived in my bedroom in the big cupboard, and so she would just play Rod's banjo. So Rod and my mother got on like a house on fire. They both played this banjo, and that's what she was teaching John. And she also was teaching him the piano accordion.
There's a famous story of Paul's, I'm sure you're aware. He said when he and John first met, he said it was obvious that he at the time was a better guitar player, and he'd be showing John chords. He said, and it took me 5 days to realise that this guy was picking out banjo chords. I said, these aren't guitar chords, John.
That's right. That's right. And Paul was in, his audition was Long Tall Sally, wasn't it? He burst into Long Tall Sally.
20 Flight Rock.
Was it 20 Flight Rock?
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. Because when he came to Long Tall Sally, they were playing on the Cavern stage. It's just a lovely story that it was a jazz club, sort of imported, if you like,
Yes.
copied from Le Caveau, a jazz club in Paris, which I don't know if it's still there. Be interesting to find out. And Alan no, was it? I can't say that name. Came and because they were doing Long Tall Sally, and Paul knew the words, but he only knew the words Long Tall Sally. That's all he knew. And there were complaints saying this is a jazz club. Like, you're going to have to go if you carry on with this like mindless music, which I just think is really lovely. That's when they first started as well.
Paul tells that story, doesn't he, that when he first went to see the Quarrymen with John on the back of the lorry at St Peter's.
Yes.
And he said the main song he was singing, John only knew the chorus line to. So rather than admit he only knew the chorus line, he made up all the words in the verse.
Well, I think they all did it. I don't think there's any singers that don't. And Judi Dench has recently said that she often forgets the words and just ad-libs. And she said, fortunately, nobody knows the words, so they don't realise. And we are talking Shakespeare. So I think, imagine learning all those words, imagine it. And all those songs even, just knowing every word to how many songs? 150 songs you'd have to have at your fingertips.
What was Mimi like? What was Auntie Mimi like as a person?
Well, she wasn't Auntie Mimi for a start. She was Mimi, always. Just to the children. She was Mary to the adults. She was just, she's the eldest, matriarchal, held a lot of sway in what went on in the family. Never had children. I don't know what else I can say about her.
Now then, in the summer of '67, back there, of course, as we touched on earlier, Brian died so young, 32 years of age.
Yeah.
What effect do you think that actually had on the four Beatles?
Devastating. Absolutely devastating, because he had been their guiding light. And it's just as well that he lasted until he was 32, although it was drastic, because without Brian, they wouldn't have gone to London. They didn't want to leave Liverpool. And George was the last to go. He was still going up and down on the train, and there were no high-speed trains then. It was like a bus stopping everywhere on the way with his mother's sandwiches. He was the last one to leave. John didn't leave Liverpool until October 1963. And, people who think we didn't know him, well, they're crazy. I'm saying we actually had him until he was 23, because they didn't leave Liverpool. They didn't go at 18 when they went to university. John didn't. They were all still travelling backwards and forwards, and Brian almost had to force them to make that move to London. So, without him, who knows where they would have got. And they knew that. They knew it. So there they were, removed to London, and then Brian not there.
John had been the first of them to get married, the first of them to have a child.
Yeah.
In late '66, he met this Japanese artist. What was what do you think was the connection between the two of them?
Wackiness. Yoko's willingness to go right out on a limb in her life, and therefore swept John along with all that. He was a rebel. I'm sure things had been rumbling for some time. Cynthia was absolutely a delightful, beautiful in every way, beautiful inside and out woman, and you've got to leave that in, please. She was beautiful inside and out. And she was doing what anyone from Liverpool would have done. She was staying at home in this beautiful house, supervising in Weybridge, supervising the building, looking after her own mother, looking after Julian, cooking, she was being a wife. And John had taken off, hadn't he? So they're sort of doing all this touring and stuff. And I think there'd been a sort of separation of the minds before that had happened. No one was there apart from John and Cynthia and John and Yoko. And although Cynthia has told the story, you know, of the slippers at the bottom of the stairs and all the rest of it, it happens in many, many, many relationships, doesn't it? Sometimes when it's talked about, it's like it's the only divorce that ever happened. It's the only wildly rich man who left his wife. It's just something that happened. It's part of life, and it happened, and everyone in it has to deal with it in their own way. Of course, as John's sisters, we weren't directly affected the way Julian was affected. And if you're going to talk about anything, you have to talk about how it affected that little boy.
There is a sort of overview, if you like, of John and Paul. That Paul is the cuddly one you can take home to your mother with the songs you can sing along to in the shower. And John is the sort of caustic wit who could cut anybody dead or be charming in 30 seconds flat. Yeah. Do you think that's just a little bit too romantic, that view of the pair of them?
It's probably extreme in both cases. I think personally that John was a genius. I don't think there's any question about that. And how many geniuses would you get in a group of 4? Do you think? But without Paul, I don't think John would have done what he did with his life. As I said, I call them the dream team. And Paul had lost his mother when he was 14, spent a lot of time with us in our house. My mother, ironically, used to say, that poor boy, he lost his mother, you know. And then, of course, when our mother died, that was a bond, a real bond instantly between them. And I think that relationship was the basis of the Beatles. That's what as a personal thought, that's what I think.
After Brian's death, Paul seemed to have sort of took over. Apple was formed, and they went off to do something which, in hindsight, seems utterly mad as a plan, in that they would write the film, produce the film, direct the film, and star in the film.
Yeah. They all do it now. Every star has become a director, producer.
What of the Magical Mystery Tour? When you first saw it, what was your thoughts?
It's not a work of genius, is it? It's all right for you laughing. It's me that's got to give the opinion. It's not for me.
Okay. No. It was the first time the British press, I know that the British press more so now, is very good at building people up in order to knock them straight back down again. With the Beatles, the first chance I guess they had to get at them was the day after Mystery Tour had been screened. And they were able to say, what the hell was this tosh almost, and what was it all about? And now, of course, with glorious hindsight of 50 years, we have people like Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese saying it was one of the greatest avant-garde films ever made.
Well, who are they to say that? Does that mean it is one of the greatest avant-garde films because they said it?
Yeah.
Does it?
Well, I don't know.
No, of course it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of personal opinion, isn't it? And so you've fallen into that trap of somebody very rich, very famous, who makes millions of films and millions of dollars with it, says it's a work of genius, so it's a work of genius? Is it?
Well, exactly. I understand your point, yeah. What I mean, the fact that the British press did pull them down because of Mystery Tour,
yeah.
Do you think, do you think they probably took that in their stride? No big problem?
I don't know how much it meant to them. I don't know. I wasn't side by side with John at that point. And we're talking 1967 now. And 1967, John and I had many, many, many long conversations in the mid-70s, 74, 5, 6, 7. And on the phone, I'm talking conversations because he was in America and I wasn't. And we never talked about the Magical Mystery Tour. I don't know what his feelings were about it. I think if he'd have thought it was the best thing he'd ever done, he might have mentioned it. But I'm just talking supposition here, you know. When we did talk, it was all about family. But I really don't know. All I'm saying is it's not for me. And I am sort of in the spotlight here. And I'd just be making it up if I said what a wonderful thing it was. Whereas when I listened to John's words, when I listened to the lyrics, when I came in, I said, I see at least 3 poets. Would you call them? They might be called rock poets because the genre is there. I've thought for years that Bob Dylan should have got the Nobel Prize. All us old hippies talk about that. Why on earth didn't he get it? Read the words. I've got it as a book of words without the musical notes and minims and crotchets and stuff like that, just so that I can read them as they are. And I know he's an old goat, and he says, I never meant anything. I never wanted to lead a rebellion. Well, all right. That's coming right from you, from the horse's mouth. So I have to believe you, and I do. But please, just let me read the words because they are beyond fantastic. I mean, he was the first reason I ever skipped school. We used to go down to listen to Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell because our friend, she was the only one on Mother Avenue, again, right next to Paul's house, where both parents worked because Mum didn't work in those days. None of the mothers worked. So her father was some sort of police inspector and her mother worked for the Royal Insurance. So we had the house and we'd all go down there to listen to Bob Dylan. I just love him. I really do. So I'm really pleased about that. Leonard Cohen is a long, long time hero of mine. And sadly, I've only seen him twice, but I have been reading his words forever, and I've got them as a book of words. And I saw him when he came back on the scene a few years ago. And apart from the voice dropping another few octaves, he's as wonderful as ever. And the other one I see is John. So 3, as I say, rock poets. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. So I wouldn't include Yellow Submarine in that. I don't think anyone with a brain would. I wouldn't include Magical Mystery Tour in that. I don't think Paul would either. Whereas John's lyrics are, for me, unsurpassable, especially as the solo career. Watching the Wheels is one of my absolute favourites. Again, like Strawberry Field Penny Lane, when Brian needed a record out and the record companies are screeching at him, get back, people will forget about you. You know, what they meant was, we will stop making money out of you. And I thought that song, that one, and then Starting Over, you know, he's writing his autobiography, isn't he? And I saw in an interview once, I was laughing, that somebody said, are you going to write your autobiography? And he was utterly caustic and scathing about it. I wouldn't write my autobiography. Only idiots do that. I thought, John, you're doing it all the time. He had been doing it the whole time, hadn't he?
I always think as a fan, I always think he did it every 12 months. Every time he gave us an album, he gave us his life.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, yeah.
So I've got 2 final questions. 1st of June next year, Sgt. Pepper is 50 years of age. Mm-hmm. It's regularly tops album charts.
Yep.
It's one of the greatest things ever. Rolling Stone magazine have named it the greatest album in the universe, never mind just planet Earth.
Yeah. It got all sorts of awards, Grammy awards and everything.
Is it your favourite Beatles record?
No. Do you know, I like the Plastic Ono Band. They're not Beatles records, are they? Beatles Revolver definitely. I think that was the turn, when they were on the turn. I thought it was really exciting. I never liked Love Me Do, but loved Please Please Me. And, as he was getting away from the, like, Love Me Do was a few notes, repetitive, not exciting enough. Well, it didn't get to number one, did it? Whereas Please Please Me sort of was their real song springboard.
There's a famous quote from George Martin where he says the minute they finished recording it, he turned around to John and Paul and said, "You've got your first number one."
Yeah. You can hear it straight away in the first notes. You can hear it. Yeah, but all their early stuff. You get an album, and there'll be one. This is years ago. There'll be one or two or three maybe on the whole album that you really, really, really liked, and the rest of them you just sort of, they were on the album. You'd skip it. You'd skip them in the days when you did it yourself. I think the Beatles records were the other way around. There might be one you weren't too fond of, and the rest of them you were just nuts about. So we all ended up knowing the words and the tune to everything. The White Album was like this. It was a double album. Within a week, you knew every word. You practically wore the thing out. So all their records were great, but I love John's solo career. I really, really do. And I do love the Plastic Ono Band stuff.
Finally, and again, it's a fairly big question. All their early albums are more than 50 years old now. There's only about 3 more albums after next year that have got to get turn 50. Okay. Even the bulk of his solo catalogue is 30, 40 years of age. How do you think he would feel knowing that the children of the 21st century, 5 decades after he started, are as nuts about him and the Beatles as they were 5 decades ago?
I really don't know. Again, how detached from reality would John be by this time? We just don't know, do we? I mean, sadly, for us, he had a career that took off when he died. A different career. It was another trajectory, wasn't it, that took off in 1980. Liverpool was reborn in 1980 because John died. So I can't answer that question. We don't know where he would have been. I like to see him writing like he loves Spike Milligan. I see him as a Spike Milligan character, complete utter nutcase, writing away, maybe dealing with grandchildren and stuff, But that's in my own head. I see John going more and more into writing, and not in his own right and Spanish in the Works, which are hugely hysterical, right out of Spike Milligan's book. I could see him becoming quite serious, but then that's in my own mind. But looking back to his sort of unsought-for fame, I don't know what he would have done. Maybe he'd be on that island in Ireland that they bought without any fresh water. Maybe he would have done something like that. Maybe he'd be living in Liverpool and New York. He was definitely coming back.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.